Welcome, everyone, to the November webinar of ACLS. Back in September, ACLS welcomed the Reverends Stacy Stackhouse and Bridget Fiddler, who spoke to us about community-engaged liturgical design. If you missed that webinar, you can find it on the ACLS YouTube channel. Just spell out the words Association of Consultants, etc., to find the YouTube channel. The webinar demonstrated how Partners for Sacred Spaces works with clients through a case study of St. Vincent Roman Catholic Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Once the webinar concluded, it was clear that there were many more questions about how PSS works that we would like to explore. It also seemed that there might be potential for some kind of collaboration or cross-referencing between ACLS and PSS. So we would like to explore that as well. Sister Marilyn Morgan will be asking the questions, and Shelley Stackhouse will be responding. And if anybody would like to ask a question in between, you're welcome to just jump in whenever you want. But otherwise, please press your mute button so we don't have any dogs barking or whatever in between. So welcome, Shelley, and welcome, Marilyn.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to get started with the questions. And as Pam has said, please jump in if you have questions. These are questions that the webinar committee surfaced after the first webinar. And we had so many questions that we decided to invite Shelley back. And it's kind of unusual for us to do this, but it was such a lively discussion that we knew that you probably had some questions too. So our first question, Shelley, is what are the parameters of your work and what services are typically included in your scope and what's not included?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having us back. I'm sorry that Bridget can't be with me. We have a major training going on right now that Bridget is part of, and I'll say more about that in a minute. So she could not be with us. So you got me. And I do want to make a quick correction. This happens to us all the time. So the name of our organization is Partners for Sacred Places. And so if you look up Partners for Sacred Spaces, you're not going to get us. So it's PSP. And believe me, Pam, this happens literally on a daily basis. So we're so used to it at this point, but Partners for Sacred Places. So the quick elevator speech on Partners for Sacred Places is that we work with older and historic sacred places. We work with churches and synagogues, and for the first time, a mosque this year, of all kinds, all across the country. So we are a national, non-sectarian, nonprofit organization. We help congregations steward older and historic sacred places for active community use. Okay. So that kind of defines the parameters of our work. So we have several different ways of several different parts of the organization. I'm the senior director of programs, and what we do in our program sector is we work with either grants that we have received or grants that other people have received and then contracted with us to help them carry out. So for example, Lilly Endowment, as you probably know, has a program called Thriving Congregations. And we are right now, those are often given to judicatories or, parachurch organizations of some kind. And we are right now working with five Thriving Congregation projects in 5 different states with 3 different denominations. And we're named as a consultant, so we do work with them. So I'll tell you what that work is in a minute. So the program sector is one of them. And then we have a consulting sector. Our consulting sector is fee for service. So there's a question, coming up about whether we charge for our services. Some of them we do. So we consult with congregations on capital campaigns. That's Bridget's expertise, actually. We also work with congregations on community engagement, and we're going to, I think, talk a little bit more down the line about the parameters around community engagement, but that's a big piece of our work, and we do that often in the grant programs that we are as well. And then there's one more piece to the work that we do, and that's called the National Fund for Sacred Places. And that is fundforsacredplaces.org. So we administer, this is also funded by the Lilly Endowment. We administer the fund along with the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And every year we invite congregations to send us a letter of intent for major capital projects. So this isn't for just replacing the furnace. This is a major capital project. And the parameters around the fund, you can look on the website, but the major ones are it needs to be historic in some way, whether or not it's landmarked. It needs to be able to be, either because of its history, what's happened there, or because of its architecture, because of its age, because of its setting. Somehow there's a uniqueness about it. And so last year we received just shy of 400 letters of intent, and we have given out 18 awards. So it's a tad competitive. And the awards go from $100,000 to this year for the first time $500,000, and they are matching grants. So congregations have to match. And we also, we don't just give the money. That's where Bridget is today. We do a major training program for them in a whole variety of things. And then they are also given what we call a choice of one technical assistance. And that can be help with capital campaigns, help with community engagement, a whole variety of kinds of things that they can choose. So those are the main things that we do. The other one that I just want to mention is Halo. So we do Halo studies for churches, and what a Halo is, about 15 years ago, we got together with the University of Pennsylvania's School of Social Policy and Practice, because it was clear to us that although churches sometimes, not always, understand that they are valuable to their communities and they can tell lots of stories about that value, people in government and philanthropy don't care about our stories. They want to know, in terms of dollars, what do we contribute to the economy of our area? And so the folk at the University of Pennsylvania developed a set of algorithms, and we have a lengthy questionnaire. I've done them, it takes about 4 hours to complete a Halo questionnaire. And then we spend another frustrating couple of hours with a spreadsheet and come up with, and the original study found that most urban congregations contribute upwards of $1.7 million a year to their local economy. And most rural congregations contribute somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000 a year. So we also do Halo studies. And there is a fee for those as well. So Marilyn, that's a big answer to that question.
No, that's very enlightening, actually. So you partially answered this question about how do people typically find out about you. So if they, I'm sort of confused, but if they know about the Lilly Foundation, then they're going to find you?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, Lilly Endowment's huge. They give to lots of things other than religion. But most people find us by word of mouth, ironically, and also through our website, which is sacredplaces.org. And but really often what it is they are looking for some kind of help, and either someone in their judicatory or their diocese or whatever connects them to us. Often they'll have a neighboring church that may have worked with us, and I found partners because I went to serve a church. I'd spent 40 years in the ministry before I went to work for Partners in the United Church of Christ. And I went to serve a church as an interim whose pastor had left suddenly, and they had gotten a national fund grant, and they were in the middle of a capital campaign. And that's when I met Partners. So the national fund brings a lot of folks' attention to us. But anybody can refer somebody to us, like you.
Yeah, like us. Definitely. Well, that we're going to pursue that. So that's probably answering the question of how would we connect with a potential church.
Yeah, probably. I mean, the best, you can certainly connect through the website. But you all now have my email, and that's the best way is if you can connect with a human being. You can also call us, and our phone number's on the website. So that's the easiest way to connect. And there's a place on the website for an inquiry, and there are 2 or 3 of us who regularly answer those inquiries and connect you with the staff member that's most appropriate to what you want to do.
I think this is really interesting because I'll speak for myself. I was not really aware that like I could connect with you if I had a project. And I think that
Mhm.
the more that consultants are aware that
Yeah.
we can consult with you, it would be very helpful for a project rather than, trying to do it on our own or fishing for help somewhere. So the more we know about what you do, I think the better it is. I don't know if anybody has any responses to that, but that's what I think. So, and you've already explained about charges for your service. So it's not all totally free. So,
No, if we're working on somebody else's grant, they're paying us. So, whatever. So for example, let me give an example of that. So we are working with both Episcopal dioceses of Indiana and on a Thriving Congregations project. We have been, God bless us, in and out of 82 Episcopal churches over the last 3 years. And what we've learned a lot, I'll tell you. And what we have done under their grant is severalfold. We do some training with congregations on fundraising, training on connecting to their communities, training on space sharing, how to manage space sharing. And then we did site visits. And what we did at the site visits was we went in and did a tour of the site and talked with the congregation about what was there, what were the amenities that were there in each room, what were the amenities in the entire space, was there Wi-Fi, was there air conditioning, was there a parking lot, all that sort of thing, were there accessible bathrooms, were there accessible entrances, green space, all of that, and then evaluated sort of each space that was potentially usable by the public. In other words, I don't care about the pastor's office or the furnace room. And then we talked to them about how those spaces might be improved, therefore to be able to be more attractive to be used by the public, whether that's accessibility or my personal favorite, decluttering. Yep. I'm like, we need to Marie Kondo all of our sacred spaces in this country. It's out of hand. So I have my own little speech that goes with that, in which I try to be extremely kind and extremely clear. So, yeah, so we did that. And then we had asked them to invite, half a dozen to 10 community leaders in a variety of realms, the arts, social services, education, healthcare, to come and take the same tour, take not with us, but take the tour, and then sit down and talk about what are the unmet needs in the community and how might this sacred place, how might this property contribute toward meeting those needs? Who else needs to see this? Who are the funders in the community that might be able to help the sacred place to bring the space into a place where it could be better used? So that was our particular piece of Indiana. And I like that project because it does tell you a lot about what is important to us and what we try to help a church with. So,
well, in that particular project, that space was going to be used as a church or it was not going to be used
Oh,
as
no,
a-
those are all 82 Episcopal churches, and they are being used as a church. And some of them are vital, strong, going concerns, but they had extra space. I mean, most churches that I know have enormous amounts of unused space during the week.
Right.
And so, I mean, even in a lot of you are affiliated with, or work in Catholic churches, and so those schools, oh boy, so many buildings that have so much space that could be used in a missionally aligned way. That's what we always say is we're trying to help churches and synagogues use their spaces in missionally aligned ways. So we have a whole project that we work with churches called a property mission statement, helping congregations figure out what they understand the mission of their property is. And therefore, how can they
Interesting.
find people that are aligned with that mission to come in and help use space? Now, Marilyn, several of the churches that we visited in Indiana were very small and on the verge of closure. And so, we had some conversations with them about what might come next. And I think at some point we're going to talk about that. So,
Well, let me throw in a question that's not on there.
sure.
Is there a confusion or could there be a confusion with other, well, let me put it this way. I have heard in working with projects that there are companies that you can get to help you raise money.
Mhm.
Is there a confusion between what you do and what these, just bring in this company and they'll do the fundraising for you? Do you run into that?
So there are a number of companies out there. Some of them are great, some of them are not, who will work with you on doing a capital campaign or seeking
Right.
out grants or other things like that. It's really important for a church to vet anybody that they're going to work with like that, to get lots of recommendations, to find out who they've worked with in their area. We charge for capital campaign services, a percentage of what they are trying to raise is how we do that. So they kind of fold in what it costs into the campaign itself. Yeah, you just have to be really careful about, because nobody's going to do it for you. And if they say they are, then I would run away because they're not. But we try to help people, it's the teach a person to fish kind of thing. We try to help folks so that they can, going forward, do an amount of this on their own.
Well, it also seems to offer much more just somebody who comes in to help raise money. I mean, you're looking at
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
future possibilities and
Mhm.
other ways to do that. So I guess it would be
Yeah.
extremely important to vet and find out what you can do versus just, help me raise some money here.
Right, because we do community-wide fundraising, so not just within the parish itself, but looking at individuals, foundations, organizations, and part of the halo thing is for folk to be able to interpret to the community, hey, we are valuable. You don't want us to go away because we are valuable to this community. So help us, with this old building that's got issues.
I think you probably have answered this question. When you're working on a larger project, how do you integrate your work with the larger
Mhm.
project team members?
Yeah, so again, when we're working with a congregation, we may be working just with members, leaders within the congregation itself, whether it's their governing board, their clergy, or a specific team that's doing this. We may also be working with officials from their judicatory. So in Indiana, we're also working with diocesan officials. We have a canon in each of the two dioceses that we are working with on our team. So we think it's really important for everybody to work together and for everybody to listen to each other, and particularly for us to listen to the team members in the congregation, the clergy, and the diocesan folk, because they've been living in this property. We're just coming to visit, and our new having an outside eye come in, as you know, because you all do this, right? It makes a big difference when you got somebody from the outside coming in and you see, in addition to the clutter, you see all the wonderful stuff that they may not even see anymore. So you see potential and possibility that they don't see. But we try not to come in saying, oh, you silly people, don't you see what you have here and what you could do with it? We try to help that process happen naturally and with help from the community. And that's why we want the community to come in, because then they can also say, hey, you have something amazing here. Let's see what can happen with it. So I think we really work. And just as our staff, we almost never go individually to work with a client. We almost always go at least in pairs because it's important to have more than one perspective.
It seems to me, I could be wrong, but when you come into a space, you're actually influencing the master plan of what they want to do. Like if you see that potential use of a space, then they're going to have to do something perhaps to make that change, which influences their master plan, which influences their budget. Can you speak
Marilyn,
to
I
that?
wish they all had master plans.
Definitely.
That's one of the things that we work really hard to encourage folk to do. Before we work with the congregation, we strongly urge, and in some cases insist, but at least strongly urge, that they have an architect or an engineer come in and do a full building assessment.
Okay.
Because that's not our expertise. We're not architects and we're not engineers. Because especially if they're going to do fundraising or if they're going to be looking at space sharing, they really need to know what they need to be planning for and what the issues are. I mean, if they know that the roof leaks and so they have a plan, a master plan that involves, okay, we're going to replace the roof, we're going to raise money for that, but they don't know that they have issues in the foundation. And all of a sudden, 2 years after they've done that fundraising and replaced the roof, then they discover this. So now they're going to go out and nickel and dime people again, right? To try to do this. It's better to have a really good master plan based on what they see. I mean, what they can know about from an architect or an engineer. What we don't see a lot of in a lot of congregations, and this is kind of across denomination, is a really good sense of how you plan for the next 10 years for the use of space.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of folk will have, vision statements or plans for how they want to do evangelism or Christian education or whatever it is that they want to do, but very few have a really good sense about, they tend to be more reactionary about their space than planning ahead. And it's the same thing with folk using the space. They kind of often, if we build it, they will come. We kind of wait for folk in the community to say, oh, hey, we need a space for a Girl Scout troop. Oh, okay. Rather than thinking through, how do we want this space used? What's missionally aligned? And what makes sense for long term? And also, what can we handle? We see, there was this congregation in Indiana that I was working with recently. Their building is used like crazy. They have every room all the time. It's amazing. The only problem is it really got out of hand and they don't have the staff to really keep an eye on this, and they don't have space for themselves. So we really are going to do a major strategic visioning on property with them to say, okay, wait a minute. You got to figure out what the point is here of this property, and therefore make an actual plan that you can implement, that you have the staff capacity to implement.
I would imagine if you're giving these tours of other people coming in to look at the space and see, what their ideas and that is also going to influence the master plan.
That's the point. That is the point, because we strongly believe, so we have all sorts of ways of getting community involvement. Just bringing folk in for a tour is one. For smaller congregations that don't have either a lot of volunteer time or a lot of cash, We will do something called a community conversation, which is similar to what we did in Indiana, but slightly larger. Invite them to get 12 to 20 leaders, and we help them to curate a list of those leaders. Invite them to come in on a weekday afternoon when we can get folk that, are coming from work, and see the space. And then we have a curated set of questions that we worked on with the congregation to ask them about the space and the community. And what's really interesting about this, Marilyn, is that folk in a lot of churches assume people in the community know their space.
Mhm.
And what they discover is most of these people have never been in it, or they were at a wedding or a funeral,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
but they had no idea that there is a 4-story education building behind it that is sitting empty or half empty during the week. And once folk get inside and they see, I can't tell you how many times I've heard a community member say, I had no idea there was so much space here. And then the congregation begins to understand they have an asset that they often see as an albatross because it costs them a lot of money and time to keep up. But what an asset this could be.
Well, I would imagine that you would also have to put some reins of control over, people touring might want Mount Vesuvius, or whatever, and having to help the community draw some boundaries of, what is affordable, what really does work with their mission, because I can see other people really wanting the whole thing.
Well, in some cases, that would be a good thing, because if you've got a little church that is on the edge of closure, not
Mhm.
quite ready to close, but they got very little money, they have way more space than they need, and they can't afford to pay clergy sometimes. So if they can find what we call an anchor tenant, someone who could take over a large piece. And again, we work with them to put together leases, and space sharing agreements and all of that stuff that you need to have. I mean, who's going to take out the trash? Who's going to deal with maintenance issues? We have a staff member who's our space sharing guru, and she's got all kinds of templates for folk and insurance and, all that kind of stuff that you have to deal with, security. But sometimes if a congregation can get an anchor tenant, it can extend their life, because what they can do is even, they can make an arrangement that they will have use of the space on Sunday, or of some of the space, so of their worship area and of maybe a fellowship hall or someplace where they can gather and have coffee, a parlor, whatever the place has. There's a church that I was at. This is actually in Montreal, an Episcopal church in Montreal. They share space with a circus. So think about a lot of sanctuaries. And again, this is something for those of you in Roman Catholic circles that probably would not happen. But
Not at all.
so anyway, let me just tell you a story because it's a good one. So this is actually a troupe of aerialists. So it's people that hang from the ceiling and do stuff, perfect, big, high Gothic church, big, high ceilings, stained glass windows, beautiful places to put lighting, and do all kinds of stuff. Well, the circus is there several nights a week and to practice during the day. And then the parish is there on Sunday. And so they are sharing this space, and there's a cafe, a small cafe that uses a chunk of their fellowship area that's open all during the week, that has coffee and, donuts and various stuff like that during the day. They're on a very busy street in Montreal. So they have figured out a way to share space that respects the space. It's art. It's beautiful, actually. We saw a performance of the earliest. It's beautiful. They use classical music. It's just it was really stunning. So they felt these folk respected the space and wanted to enhance its beauty in the way the church has always promoted the arts from the get-go. This is just a different kind of art than has often been in there before. So yeah. anyway, so an anchor tenant can save the life of a congregation or at least
Interesting.
extend it.
So have you ever worked with a liturgical consultant?
No, and because I knew that there were liturgical consultants and liturgical architects. I knew that y'all existed, but I didn't know there was an organization, and we didn't know that. And so now I'm fascinated by what we can do. When we're working with community engagement and churches that really want to make significant changes or do some kind of adaptive reuse, we'll often do a design charrette. And I'm assuming you all know what that is, right? I don't have to explain.
Mhm.
Okay, so what we'll do is recruit local architects to come in and spend a couple of days in the playpen there, making drawing, just loose drawing, not significant drawings, but loose drawings, and imagining what the space might be like. If a project is going to involve the worship space, it would be a natural to have one of you all be there to also play in the space, to think, so what I'm thinking is, how do you, especially if it's a space that is going to be, so here's one. So we're working with a church in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and their worship space, which is huge. So the worship space seats like 1,000 and the congregation is like 100.
Mm.
So this is not a match anymore. This is a Presbyterian church. And they are in negotiations right now with actually a local hospital that would love to open a mental health center in this space, which they feel is very missionally aligned with who they are and what they've done. But they now need to move they're going to stay there. They're small, but they're mighty, and they're not ready to close by any means. And they have enough money, they will have enough money with this to keep them going for some time with their pastor and everything. But they have a little chapel that was kind of much neglected and not much used. So now they're looking at, how do we redesign the chapel to be our place of worship every week, all the time? How do we make it a place that fits us? How do we look at, the church was built, it's mid-century modern, so it was built in the 50s. And, the sensibility of a worship space in the 50s is not necessarily the sensibility of a worship space now. So, how do you redesign that chapel to meet the needs of the way they're doing worship now, and the sensibilities of the 21st century? So I could imagine working with you all, right? Would that be something that might fit?
Absolutely. Because
Yeah.
that's a question, one second, Ken, that's a question that we're asking because we wanted to know, what do you do and how do we fit with you? Ken, you're muted. There you go.
There you go.
Yeah, I happen to be working on that project as a liturgical design consultant.
You are
Yeah, and
Emmanuel Church?
yeah, and
Woo!
the entire process you just described is what we've been through there, and what I've been through there. And what I found to be marvelous was that I was invited to participate just almost as one of the congregation. And so I attended all of the sessions and with the community leaders and the charrette, and I was labeling drawings and presenting, and it was quite wonderful. And my piece of it is updating the old chapel, creating a worship setting in the old
Yeah.
chapel. And we've been waiting for a while to get the funding in place and all that. They did
Well,
a
there were,
analysis
Ken
and
can
everything.
tell you there were some hiccups in this, that they were originally going to be, that their big space was going to be used by the symphony, and they were
Right.
getting all ready to make that happen, and then the symphony pulled out. So then they
Yeah.
had to completely recalibrate.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's been an ongoing process since before the pandemic.
Yeah.
But what I thought was remarkable about it was like the all hands on deck approach.
Hmm.
A whole wide variety of people with a wide variety of skills and interests and backgrounds, and the brainstorming that took place was absolutely marvelous. And the people
Were
from
you at the asset mapping, Ken, were you
Yeah.
at the asset mapping? We'll talk
Yeah.
about that in a minute, but go ahead.
I
Yeah.
put my little yellow stickies up on the wall and yeah, but it was remarkable. And I thought the facilitation by the people from Partners was just very, very skilled. It
Oh,
was,
good.
it was a very successful process. It was wonderful to be a part of it.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. I'm so glad you're here because that's an amazing project and that's a great example of how you can be involved. Yay. So I'm really glad that that happened. But we need to be even more aware of you all ongoing. So can I say a word about the asset mapping? This is
Absolutely.
this is a great tool. And if we're going to do a charrette of any kind, we try to have the architects there when this happens. So I talked about the community conversation. That's a little a smaller event, an easier event. Takes us about 4 months to plan an asset mapping with a congregation. The goal of the asset mapping is to get around 50 community members. Sometimes it's less than that. We have one that we're doing in Harrisburg in a couple weeks that they currently have 80 people coming, and we're panicking and getting more of our staff involved. So what they do is we invite folk in all of the, as you said, all hands on deck, everybody involved in lots of areas of the life of a community. And they all are invited to come together. They do a tour of the space, same. And I think half of the problems of so many churches in terms of their community relations could be solved if they could just get people in and invite them to tour the space and listen to them. Because we're so used to, in the church, inviting people in and then talking to them. So this is a switching of a paradigm. We're saying this is not about evangelism. And sometimes folk are like, well, aren't we getting them here so they'll want to join the church? No, maybe they will, who knows? But that's not the point of this. The point is for you to listen. So they take a tour and then they come and they sit around tables and we ask them to name what are the assets that this church has or has access to. And they're assets in a variety of things. They're physical assets. Those are the easy ones. But we say get very specific about it. You know, there are 100 chairs in this room. There are round tables. What do you have? What do you have? And then individual assets. What kind of human assets do you have? What kind of economic assets do you have? And then what narrative assets do you have? What is your story? And what do people know about you? And then associations and institutions. So who are you connected with in the community, or who is in the community that you might connect with? And they write every single one of those assets in Sharpies in large cap letters on sticky notes, the little sticky notes. And they put them on these big sticky papers or long sticky, however we do it, on the walls. We do it different ways, whoever, depends on who's leading the asset mapping. And then we say to the small group, they do this in small groups, and then we say, okay, now go up and don't just put like things together. Think outside the box a little bit. How would you combine some of these assets to serve the community? And amazing things happen. People get all kinds of ideas. And what's really cool about this is, you know, you assume that all of the leaders in various things in the community talk to each other. And we discover that they don't. They don't. And they come here and sometimes they meet each other for the first time. And that's especially true in urban areas. And they get to talking to each other and they say, well, wait a minute, you do this, we do this, wait a minute, we could do this, and it could happen here. And it's just fascinating. So a really good example from a church I worked with in St. Louis. This is one of those. So in the 1950s and 60s, so many churches built education wings, either a wing or a separate building. This one was 4 stories. The church once had 1,000 kids and 6,000 members. They're now still a vital church. They have just under 1,000 members, but I guarantee you they don't have 1,000 kids anymore. So they had a building, the first floor had a daycare, the other 3 floors were empty 7 days a week.
Mm.
So they thought that this could only be for education, some kind of a school, because that's what they had known. They were classrooms. We took the community leaders around, and the first thing that I kept hearing from the community leaders was, there's a bathroom in every one of those Sunday school rooms. That means there's plumbing throughout the entire building, housing.
Interesting.
And nobody had in the church, that hadn't even occurred to them as a possibility. But the community could see something that they could no longer see because they'd only seen it for teaching. So, you know, stuff like that comes up, and I'm sure I wasn't at the one in Albuquerque, but I know it just, there was so much that came out of that was so interesting. So it's a lot of fun. It really is a lot of fun. And if we can have the architects there, if we're going to do a charrette and we can have all the architects there and the consultants, the designers, oh my gosh, right? That's a real plus.
And it would be important to have the consultants. I mean, we always say we want the major players in the beginning, you know,
Yes.
not brought in later on, like, oh, this is what we planned. Do you have anything to say? You know,
Right.
reactionary. That doesn't really work well.
No, because partly they'll often have their own ideas already set, and then they ask you to come in and implement their ideas instead of realizing, you know, you have a lot, you have so much expertise that you could, when you see it, you might see other things in addition to what they see.
It's really important. Here's a question about, we talked a little bit about it. Do you ever have a project where the church is, use what word you'd like, decommissioning, whatever, and after that they're all slated to close, and after the discussion they find that they're not going to close because perhaps you've brought in these other people that would give them life?
Well, here's the trick. Sometimes we have folk find out about us and approach us. And one of our questions has always to them in our intake conversation has to do with, what is your runway? Because if people come to us and they say, well, we're going to run out of money in 6 months, and there are 12 of us in the congregation, it's really hard for us to do anything for them at that point. We can give them good advice on how to, you know, who to approach in the community other than just going with the first realtor that they find in, you know, on social media or whatever. So we can advise them and give them suggestions, but there's not a whole lot that we can do at that point. If they come to us and they have, let's say, a 2 to 5 year runway, they have a little bit of time, a little bit of money, and some decent leadership. If we have 3 or 4 lay people in particular who are strong leaders and have some time to give, then there's work that we can do. And what we find is, I just, the one message I wish I could get out to sacred places across the board is, you have to understand that you not only don't have to do this alone, you shouldn't do it alone. And too many congregations, especially when they're shrinking, turn inward and they don't look out. So for a congregation that is in, you know, getting close to closure, simple space sharing is not going to solve the problem. You know, getting another scout troop in is not going to solve the problem. So then they have to look, we can help them look for, do the community engagement work, look for an anchor tenant that might allow them to continue not only to worship there, but to free up both dollars and volunteer time to do that mission work, that evangelism work, you know, that they simply don't have time or energy to do because they're trying to keep the furnace from breaking down. So there are congregations whose lives have been extended considerably if they've been able to find a community partner to be a major space sharer with them. The other thing that sometimes we have found is folk do not understand their own value. And if we are able to help them change that paradigm, not only to have the community understand their value, but for them to understand how important they are on their corner of whatever town they're in, that there are stakeholders in this property and what happens to it other than them. Their neighbors care about what happens here. The local businesses care about what happens here. Sometimes when they begin to think they are valuable, then they're able to reach out and other folk will come in and see, oh, these people, A, they like each other. B, they're doing something important. C, they care. And, you know, so much of, so many young people are not involved in organized religion right now because they have experienced the opposite in too many faith communities. And so, you know, sometimes there is a way, once a congregation understands its own value, it gets more deeply connected to the community so that the community knows them and sees them as more than just that building that it looks like nobody ever goes in. Then that can make a difference.
Great. Okay, here's a question Peggy sent in. Let me just get this right. In the number of applications for grants and the number of grants awarded, what percentage are for churches that are renovating, and what percentage are for churches that are being closed and hoping to find an appropriate new use for their building?
So the only grant program we have is the National Fund for Sacred Places, and that is only for vital congregations.
Okay.
That's not
Okay.
for a congregation that is closing, which if you think about it, makes sense. If we're going to give you $250,000 and you're going to fix your building and close next week, and we don't know what's going to happen to that building, it doesn't make any sense for us to do that. So sometimes when we're working with the other, you know, those outside grants with, you know, with the judicatory that gets the grant and calls us in to work with them as a consultant, sometimes those have things that we call re-grants attached to them. They're much smaller. They're usually under $50,000. But sometimes they can help a church to do something that will, again, extend their life. So one of the biggest things is accessibility. Absolutely. And you know, what's interesting to me too, and you all are as liturgical designers, you know, how many worship spaces have chancel areas or bimas that have steps and are therefore inaccessible, right? So if you want to find a community partner, let's say you want to find an arts group that's going to be a community partner with you in the use of that space, many of them are going to want to find a way to make that accessible. And so sometimes the smaller grants that come from them, or we direct people, for example, if it's a historic space, there's a lot of state historic preservation organizations that have small grants. Now, not every state allows religious institutions to have them. You probably already know this. But there are a number that do. Pennsylvania, where I'm sitting right now, does. Connecticut, where I used to live before I moved here, does. You know, so we'll direct people to places like that, or local community foundations, which are the unsung heroes of so many places in this country, because they may have a donor advised fund that would go to the arts. And if there's an arts organization going to work with you, then they may be able to even get a grant that isn't allowed to go to a religious place, because it's going to be used for the arts organization. So that's really important. We tell people to keep an eye on that sort of thing. But, you know, so a chancel, depending on how many steps it has, as you know, is a tricky thing to make accessible sometimes. And, you know, in order to continue the sight lines and make it also function the way you need it to function, say for Eucharist or, you know, whatever other rites and sacraments need to happen there. So anyway, I forget what the original question was, but oh yeah, the grants thing, right. Mhm.
Another question she sent in is, do the renovations include landscaping and other construction on the land surrounding the church?
What a great question. We are more and more dealing with land. And so sometimes in a charrette, if there's a significant piece of land, we'll suggest that they invite a landscape architect to be part of that and be part of, if there's an asset mapping with that charrette, to be part of that as well. Because there are many ideas. We are beginning to work with a lot of congregations that have excess land that are beginning to talk about housing and various kinds of housing on that land. We don't do development. So but we know a number of organizations that are very good and very reputable and do. So we'll funnel people into Enterprise Community Partners or somebody like that can work with them in a missionally aligned way to work on developing housing. Yeah, so a grant itself, like the National Fund grant, is, I think that's a really good question. I think it's pretty exclusively the building itself, but I think in the processes, they might encourage people to begin to look about the land and think about the land. And certainly in our work, so in our work in Indiana, in Michigan, in New York State, and in the Pacific Northwest in Thriving Congregations projects, I was just in Spokane, Washington, and we're working on a Thriving Congregations grant out there, talking to a Korean church that had, oh my gosh, so much land, including 3 little houses that need badly to be torn down. So we were, you know, consulting with them and doing some research into the local area to say, hey, here are some other options for the use of this land. Part of it is to keep it green because they're in a fairly urban section. So can we create a park? Can we create a playground? Can we, you know, do something like that? So.
How much time do you typically spend
jump in
on
there
a
for-
project?
Whoops,
Go ahead.
Pam and Marilyn.
Pam.
Paul Barabo has a question, which is, are there grants available for projects that are currently underway?
No. Not from us. The National Fund is all money that can't be spent. I mean, money that can only be spent on new projects. And that's our only grant fund. So some of the other funds that we work with, it's up to whoever received the grant to make that decision. And sometimes they'll do that for stuff already underway.
Okay, I was wondering how much time do you typically spend on a project?
Depends on the project.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. If we're going to do, let's say, you know, the biggest set, let's say the biggest set of services. So I worked with a congregation, a UCC church in Massachusetts. I was with them for a year. We did a strategic visioning for their property. We did an asset mapping and a design charrette, and it took a year.
So are you on the project, say, from the beginning to the end?
Ideally, the lead, so how we do projects is there's a lead staff person and then a second, and on almost every project. And so on this project, I had 2 different seconds that worked with me, but I was on project beginning to end. That's really important because I get to know them, they get to know me, we trust each other, we understand each other, I hear their story, I'm familiar with their space. That's really important.
Cool. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask Shelley? Carol.
Okay, maybe Shelley'd like to go, or I can go. One of my questions would be, are you aware of or connected in any way to the Church Properties Initiative program at Notre Dame?
Yes, we are.
Huh.
What a great group of people that is. Maddie Johnson. I was so sorry when David Murphy left because I'd gotten to know David well, but I think Maddie Johnson's amazing. Yeah, so we were. I was on a panel at the very first of their annual conferences when that happened, and we've been there ever since, every year. My colleague Dana, who works in our transitions division, did a short workshop there this year. So I think I don't know if you all have been to any of those annual conferences, but they're really cool. And they have just, and I mean, it's heavily Catholic, but obviously, but there's also a lot of folk there from other traditions and other organizations that, like ours, are interfaith. So we work across the board with a variety of people. But if you're not connected to that, I encourage you to be so. And there are conference every year. Usually it's in November, but this year it was in September. So I don't know what they're planning going forward. But it's at Notre Dame, and it's like 2 days, and it's chock full of great information.
Right.
Our
Okay.
work with the Catholic Church is complicated because the decommissioning piece, we've done a lot of work off and on, and we're hoping to do more with the Diocese of Baltimore because they are decommissioning just a ridiculous number of churches, and we would love to help them do something with that space that is missionally aligned and serves the needs of Baltimore, which are vast. So they certainly have consulted with us. We've consulted with individual Catholic churches, a number of them, and every year we have 2 or 3 that end up with a national fund grant. So we work with them, but the decommissioning piece is complicated, and we keep trying to figure out how can we work more, because I mean, in terms of, in terms of the amount of property, they they are the Goliath. So
Yeah, that's good. In fact, people should know in this group that FDLC will be there next year in Baltimore. So that would be a good time to kind of try to make some of these connections together.
yeah,
Yeah. So
that would be great.
as somebody who's been working on historic churches for the last 30 years.
Oh my goodness, Carol. Oh, God bless.
Yes, thank you for your work and the way, well, yeah, I've been around a long time. I read Bob Jager's thesis. So
Oh my gosh. Okay. Bob Yeager is our
yeah,
president, and still he's the co-founder of the organization and is still our
I
president.
am, yeah. Mhm.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
So been in and out of knowing that group for a long time. Yeah.
So I have a question for you all. So if we, and Ken, obviously somebody connected with you to invite you into the Albuquerque situation. But if we wanted to make sure that if we have a project we think, wow, we really need a liturgical consultant on, what's the best way to connect with you? Is it through this organization, or is there another way?
We have a website, and if you go on the website, it has a list of members, and it could show you members in what areas there are. So that is a
Right.
way to connect with us.
Okay. Ken, how did you end up getting connected with Albuquerque?
Actually, my spiritual director, who's a retired Presbyterian minister, was good friends with Pastor Drew.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they were just chatting over coffee about the project, and my spiritual director said, "Hey, you need to talk to Ken Griesmer." So
That's great.
that was over 4 years ago now.
Wow. Word of mouth. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Shelley, do you have a question you want to ask?
Me, Shelley, or the other Shelley?
No, other Shelley.
No, I'm just fascinated listening.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought your hand was up.
No,
I was
not me.
going to say, Shelley, you could certainly become a allied member of ACLS.
Absolutely.
And that would give you a lot of information
Ah.
about us and the people that are connected to our organization.
That's great. So I can do that. If I go to your website, they'll tell me how to
Yes.
do that? Okay,
Yes.
that's great. And I feel slightly legit. I have a PhD in liturgical studies from Drew University. So,
And
um,
Jay, who's on this, Jay, do you want to respond? Are you there? Jay's in charge of membership.
oh, okay. I'll go on the website and check it out because that would be great.
Okay.
I know we're at our hour, so,
We are, and we thank you so much, Shelley, for coming back and having this
Yes.
wonderful question and answer session. And thank you, Marilyn, for asking the questions.
You're welcome. You're
Indeed.
welcome.
thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
This was great. Thank
Great to have
you.
you.
We hope to talk again with each other on projects.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a good one. Happy Thanksgiving.